It's been a long time since I've had the morning rush hour. The subway was jam-packed. As I got off at the station, large groups of strangers moved like a flock of sheep, each heading to their own destination. In the midst of that crowd, I truly felt, I'm back in New York. It was my first day back at the headquarters in New York after working in Nebraska for 3 years. Nebraska had its own charms. But I've always had a soft spot for the hustle and bustle of New York. It wasn't because I messed up or got demoted that I was transferred to Nebraska. The company I joined right out of college believed in sending their bright ones away to gain experience, and working in a regional office was a stepping stone to promotions. So, at 35, I was assigned to work in Nebraska, and after 3 years, I was called back to headquarters where a position as a deputy director awaited me. So, professionally, everything was going great for me. But there was one thing bothering me in my personal life. At this age, I was still single and didn't even have a girlfriend. Up until just before the transfer, I had a girlfriend whom I'd been with for almost 10 years, considering marriage. But whether it was a phase of fatigue or just growing apart, we broke up when I got the transfer. When I reported to my old department, everyone welcomed me back with applause. Especially the director, who had been instrumental in my career path, was overjoyed, saying, "Next, I'll be the executive director, and you'll be the director." And that evening, a welcome back party was thrown in my honor, orchestrated by the director. "Not to pry into your personal life, but do you have any marriage plans, Alex?" the director asked during the party. Ever since I joined the company, I've been in the same department as the director, who was just a supervisor at the time. We went out for drinks countless times. However, we rarely talked about our personal lives. "Oh, sorry about that, I might have been too nosy." "Well, it's not really that, I didn't have anyone in my plans." Then I told him that I had broken up with my long-term girlfriend just before I was transferred to another state. Upon hearing this, the director felt guilty, wondering if it was because he recommended the transfer. I replied, "Sooner or later, we would have broken up anyway." "So, you're not seeing anyone now?" "No, not for the past 3 years." When I said that, for some reason, the director had a pleased smile on his face. "Well then, I've got a perfect match for you, Alex. How about an arranged date?" Caught off guard, I almost spit out my drink. An arranged date? Who does that these days? Actually, my nosy relative asked me to find someone for a match. Saying that, the director rummaged through his bag, which he had placed on his lap. "I don't think arranged dates are really my thing. Just take a look at her photo. She's a catch, really. Here." He handed me a photo he had been carrying in his bag. "Oh wow, she's really something." The woman in the photo was just as the director described, strikingly beautiful, with sharp eyes, both wise and elegant. She was exactly my type. I can't just introduce anyone without thinking it through, especially when it's such a big deal for someone. "But Alex, what do you say? It's okay to refuse. Want to meet her?" It was hard to decline the director's proposal, especially considering all the help he's provided over the years. Yet, more than that, I was captivated by the woman in the photo and simply wanted to meet her. The following weekend, at a somewhat renowned hotel lounge in downtown New York, under the watchful eyes of the director's meddling relative, the arranged date took place. I was in a suit, she was in a dress. Her name is Catherine, and she's 35, 3 years younger than me. She used to work in an administrative position at a major electronics company. After about 15 minutes, our companions left the table, and it was just Catherine and me. I pondered on what to say next as I carefully admired her face. She looked even prettier than in her photos. "Alex, there's something I wanted to ask first." "Oh, what is it?" "Alex, have you ever been on an arranged date before?" I was actually thinking of asking her the same thing. I told her it was my first time and asked her the same. She also said it was her first. With someone as charming as you, I'm surprised you'd need to go on an arranged date. Wouldn't you have plenty of suitors? Oh, you're too kind. Her tone was gentle, but Catherine gave me a stern look. She probably thought I was being insincere and got upset. But that assertive side of hers was quite attractive to me. Did I say something you didn't like? I wasn't trying to butter you up, honestly. I then shared with her about my long-term relationship ending due to a job in another state, how I came back to the headquarters, got this arranged date offer from my department head, and how her photo made me want to meet her. At first, I laughed at the idea of an arranged date, but it's just another way to meet people. Even those group dates I went to when I was younger felt like group arranged dates. As I continued to share, Catherine's expression softened. You broke up with your previous girlfriend 3 years ago, right? When in September? Sometime in September, I guess. With my answer, Catherine smirked. Curious, I looked at her. Actually, I broke up with my long-term boyfriend in September, 3 years ago too. I was at a loss for words at Catherine's unexpected confession. Did you get over your ex? Yes, of course. And you? Yes, a long time ago, Catherine said, smiling. I couldn't help but smile too. And so, our arranged date came to an end, and we agreed to meet again the following weekend. I was so eager to see Catherine again that I felt restless the entire week. Every night after work, I'd think about what to wear. Never one to care much about fashion, I was quite indecisive. As I was looking through my closet, I decided on a suit without a tie. And then a thought popped into my head. What about underwear? I quickly came back to my senses. I'm such an idiot. Worrying about that was way too premature. For our first date, we met at 4 p.m. near an established department store close to the hotel where we had our arranged date. We planned to stroll around town for a bit and then find a decent restaurant for dinner. I could have booked a place in advance, but since I didn't know Catherine's preferences, I thought we'd decide on the go. Of course, I did some research and had shortlisted a few places that seemed good. So, I arrived in that town over an hour earlier than our scheduled time and checked the location of the restaurant I had in mind. After doing that, I went to the place where I was supposed to meet her, but even after our 4 p.m. meeting time, she was nowhere in sight. 10 minutes passed, then 20 minutes. I thought she might have stood me up. I was about to give up and head home when I started crossing the street. I thought of calling her to give her a resentment while walking. Then, from the other side of the intersection, I spotted her walking towards me with her cell phone in one hand. She noticed me too and waved enthusiastically. I rushed towards her, and we both stopped right in the middle of the crossing. I was thinking of calling you and heading home because you were so late. I was there too. I was waiting for you right on time over there. I said that, pointing to our meeting spot. Suddenly, she burst out laughing. The pedestrian crosswalk signal started flashing with a beeping sound. We both ran back to the sidewalk. Alex, were you waiting over there? I looked back at the beer hall named Penguin that she pointed to and silently nodded. I was here. I was waiting here. What she pointed out ahead was the department store we had chosen as our rendezvous point. Right in front of its entrance stood the department store's symbol, a penguin statue. In other words, we had agreed to meet by the penguin in front of the department store. However, I mistook it for a beer hall named Penguin across the street from the department store, while Catherine thought of it as the penguin symbol at the entrance of the store. That's a funny mix-up. Glad we didn't miss each other. Yeah, seriously. Now that I think about it, I'm thirsty. How about we grab a drink at that beer hall to pay our respects to the penguin? Sounds good. Let's do it. Because it was a weekend, The beer hall was already nearly 80% full even though it was just before 5 p.m. We ordered a big pint of draft beer and some hot dogs to snack on. We had another good laugh about the penguin confusion, and then started sharing more about ourselves. Turns out, the station nearest to Catherine's old place and where I used to live up to 3 years ago was the same. There were 3 lines at that station, but we both used the same one for our daily commute. I always bought a sports newspaper from the kiosk in the mornings. You mean the kiosk on the far west side of the platform? Yes, that's the one. As I nodded, Catherine mentioned she frequented that kiosk too. She always bought an energy drink there. I remembered. I hadn't noticed her face, but I had seen a woman buying that drink several times. When I guessed the brand of her energy drink, Catherine looked at me in surprise. Did you ever bump hands with someone when paying? Still in shock, Catherine nodded. I checked her commuting times. Our schedules overlapped. So, we might have met at that kiosk at the station. I felt a strange connection with Catherine. And we planned another date for the following weekend. For our second date, we managed to meet on time without getting the location wrong. We had a meal at a casual diner, and then shared a drink at a relaxed bar. I was quite the drinker, but she could hold her own as well. The conversation shifted to hobbies. I mentioned that while I hadn't been into it recently, I used to be really into watching plays a few years ago. I'm talking about small-time theater groups putting on shows at little venues, nothing big. I didn't particularly have a favorite troupe. I'd just randomly attend a theater, pick up a flyer, and if it piqued my interest, I'd go watch that play next. It was the same old story. Depending on the play I went to see, sometimes it was fascinating, and other times it was a letdown. The hits and misses varied greatly. I started mentioning the names of the troupes I remembered, saying this one was a hit, that one was a miss, and another was a complete dud. You've probably never heard of these troupes, have you? Ever since I began talking about the theater companies, Catherine seemed to speak less. I wondered if I bored her with topics she wasn't interested in, when I do know one of those troupes. Really, that one, the total dud. I thought that company was as obscure as it gets. You know about such a company? When I asked, after a brief pause, she made a sour face and said, "That theater group, it's the one my ex, who I broke up with 3 years ago, was involved in." I was taken aback and cleared my throat. In situations like this, should I take back what I said about being way off, or should I dig myself deeper? While I was at a loss for words, she spoke up first. "I think I was there at the theater when you came to watch. I was helping out at the ticket counter." "Well, I'm not so sure about that. I remember arriving just in the nick of time that day, barely making it for the show." Our second date ended on an awkward note. Yet, we made plans to meet again the following weekend. Our third date began with a walk in a park in New York, known for its beautiful cherry blossoms in the spring. I used to come here often for company picnics. I've been here a few times with friends. I decided not to ask who those friends were. It might get awkward again if they were from the theater group. Although it wasn't cherry blossom season, the park was adorned with various flowers. Admiring flowers wasn't really my thing. So, I quickly grew bored of the walk. Suddenly, carried by the wind, a savory aroma wafted towards us. It was coming from a food stand a little further ahead. "That smells delicious," she whispered. Hearing her, I turned to look at her. "I'm sorry, I've always been more of a pie than flowers person." Shrugging and smiling. Quickly, I added, "To be honest, I was getting a bit bored looking at the park's greenery too. How about we go get some hot dogs?" Nodding in agreement, we walked briskly towards the food stall, our hips swaying as if we were race walkers. We bought a hot dog each and a can of beer, then sat on a nearby bench. We idly watched families playing on the park's grass, couples and people walking their dogs. Taking a sip of the beer and a bite of the hot dog. Suddenly, I noticed a particularly large cherry tree right next to the bench we were sitting on. Oh, I think it was around here, that time. Was it the year before I transferred out of state, or the year before that? I had a company picnic around here. Glancing around, I noticed a public restroom to our back left. It was definitely here. A new guy was in charge of securing the spot for a cherry blossom party. He told us that it was right in front of the restroom. I remember yelling at him, wondering why he'd pick such a smelly spot. That's thoughtful of him. When you're drinking, it's convenient to be close to the restroom, right? She had a point. However, I doubted the newbie had thought that far ahead when choosing the spot. Speaking of which, I once came here for a picnic and witnessed a fight between two guys over the restroom line. I had a similar experience and asked if it was in this park. Yes, it was this park. It might have even been that restroom. When I asked about the situation at that time, a young man who looked like a heavily intoxicated college student tried to cut in line for the restroom. A middle-aged man in a suit, who was in line, confronted the young man. Then, a scuffle ensued. That's when another man, who seemed to be an acquaintance of the man in the suit, rushed over and managed to defuse the situation. Listening to her story, the memory of that time vividly came back to me. That man in the suit was my director, and the guy who stepped in later, that was me. Yours truly. You're kidding. You were there that day. Both of us were surprised and impressed by the unexpected connection from our past. A few days later, after work, my director invited me for a drink. We went to our usual large bar. As soon as we sat down, my director said, "How's it going with your arranged date? I heard you've met her a couple of times." I wasn't sure how to respond. I believed I had a good relationship with her. However, we had only been on 3 dates. I was indeed attracted to her, and I wanted to believe that she had some affection for me as well. But it was uncertain how things would turn out in the future. I talked to her, and it turns out we've unknowingly crossed paths before, I shared. Upon hearing this, he had a pleased expression on his face, as if to suggest it was a perfect match. Sounds like fate, doesn't it? Suddenly, a thought flashed through my mind. What if she's in this bar tonight, too? There had been a few times in the past when we unexpectedly ran into each other. But if we met in this bar tonight, it wouldn't just be a coincidence. It might be destiny. I excused myself to him, saying I needed to use the restroom, and started searching the expansive bar. It was a tavern near the office. It wasn't surprising to see familiar faces. However, there were mostly strangers. That's to be expected, I thought. Especially in a bustling city like New York, what were the odds of running into that one woman conveniently? I decided to give up on this silly fantasy and return to where my boss was seated. Just as I was about to turn around, there you are. She was standing right in front of me. "It's a coincidence, isn't it?" she remarked. I shook my head and replied, "Does it really feel like just a coincidence to you?" She stared back at me with a broad smile on her face.